Joining me is someone who has been inside the room for critical talks such as this one. Ivo Daalder served as the U.S. ambassador to NATO during the Obama administration. He's now the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ambassador, good to have you here. Thank you for being with us tonight. I want to ask you about this meeting. The world is looking for a response from NATO to the worsening atrocities in Ukraine. What do you think needs to be the headline out of tomorrow's NATO summit, which is probably the most watched in more than 20 years?
Well, thanks for having me. I think the headline should be a warning to Vladimir Putin that any further escalation, in particular using chemical or biological weapons or agents or God forbid, nuclear weapons, will, as the Secretary General said, fundamentally change the assessment that NATO has had with regard to its role in this conflict. I don't think that NATO can stand by. I don't think the United States can stand by if Vladimir Putin decides to use these heinous weapons that are designed fundamentally to kill people, civilians in cities and other places to be really effective, and say, well, we'll send you some more Javelin missiles. We need to continue to help Ukraine defend itself. But if that happens, in my view, we need to be prepared to help Ukraine directly to defend its country against this kind of attack. The hope, of course, is that saying that will prevent Vladimir Putin from moving in this direction and prevent the use of chemical weapons and prevent the use of nuclear weapons, because we're all much better off if that doesn't happen. I understand there are horrible things happening in Ukraine, but this is a step that would fundamentally change the strategic calculus and the situation.
So I was just talking to the member of parliament, Inna Sovsun, who is in Lviv. She's from eastern Ukraine. Her son is now in western Ukraine. And she was saying that, you know, the good news today is that the Ukrainian forces seem to have pushed the Russians back in some points around Lviv. The bad news, she fears, is that every day that Vladimir Putin hasn't taken Ukraine and hasn't succeeded may be a day closer to either the use of chemical weapons or more airstrikes or things that are more damaging. How do you assess that? How does NATO and these leaders tomorrow, how do they assess that calculus?
Well, I think she's right. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin is not going to say, "Oh my God, I made a mistake," and pull his troops out. He, as the intelligence community concluded a few weeks ago, Bill Burns, the CIA director, said to Congress, he's more likely to double down. And I think one of the reasons you heard the president say this morning, again, warning about a threat of chemical weapons. One of the reasons there is now very serious concern within the administration about looking at the particular ways in which Putin can escalate and we need to respond. And one of the reasons this is going to be an issue tomorrow in Brussels at the meeting is because Vladimir Putin has not been able to achieve his military objectives. And he is likely, unless he understands that the cost to him will even be greater, he would be likely to escalate. That's why it's important for NATO to make clear that if that happens, NATO is prepared not only to impose serious consequences, but at least quietly tell him it would mean that NATO gets involved in the war. And then he would really lose in Ukraine.
Ivo Daalder, thank you for your analysis, for your time. You know what is actually going to be happening tomorrow. At least you're the closest to knowing how that kind of thing goes. So we appreciate your time tonight. Ivo Daalder is a former United States ambassador to NATO and the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs.